Hey there neighbors, Kevin here with eTrailer, and today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Roadmaster Comfort Ride shock absorbers for tandem axle trailers here on our 2025 Grand Design Influence fifth wheel trailer. So our neighbor came to us today. He actually lives way up north and he travels down south throughout the year, and he stores his camper actually right down the road, just one exit past us here at eTrailer. And what he noticed with his previous trailer is he's actually himself swapped over to the full Roadmaster Comfort Ride kit, and he said it was an incredible difference in terms of ride quality for him, and he felt the biggest bang for his buck was really the shock absorbers. So once he purchased this new trailer, he wanted to get those on immediately, so that way when he comes and picks up his trailer and drives it all the way down to Florida, he doesn't have to worry about it being an uncomfortable ride. All right, so what our shock absorbers are going to do is help really dampen that road shock, and when we hit those potholes or when we're shifting weight between axles. So typically if you're going over a bump or some other kind of pothole in the road, what's happening is it's shifting the weight between the two axles here with our equalizer. Now they already have an upgraded equalizer with this Moride CRE 3000, and this has a rubber dampener in the center. So each time it tries to kind of shift that weight back and forth, or a bump in the road kind of pushes up real roughly on one side, it'll try to stop it with this rubber dampener in the center here. But we can obviously do a little bit better of a job by adding in some shocks just like you would on your passenger vehicle. So these are going to help every time it's trying to push inward towards that equalizer. It's going to want to force it right back, or if we're getting some up and down vertical movement, which you can see with our CRE 3000, there is a slot for that, so it has a little bit of movement for it. That's also going to be getting taken up by our shocks now. Along with that, with the angle of the shocks, since they are at a 15-degree angle facing inward, that's also going to help with our side-to-side sway. So it's not just that front to back that we're typically dealing with when we have our passenger vehicle. We're also going to have that side-to-side. So typically, especially with this fifth wheel being so boxy and so tall, it is definitely going to get a lot of headwind when it's going down the highway or crosswinds from semis on the road. So you're going to start really feeling that sway back and forth. And these are going to help you kind of eliminate that and make sure that it's a much safer and comfortable ride. All right, so overall, the install isn't too tough with this one. It just takes a little bit of planning here. So making sure that you have enough jacks, making sure that you have all of the tools that you're going to need. So torque wrench, maybe an impact. Honestly, you don't really need it too much. A 3/4 inch socket and wrench, and a 9/16 wrench and socket is honestly really all I used here, aside from the torque wrench and the jacks. So honestly, like I said, you can't do this at home if you just don't have the space to do it, though. I know a lot of the time you obviously can't get a big old fifth wheel trailer in your driveway, or maybe your HOA doesn't allow that to happen. Then you can definitely feel free to use our dealer locator, and you can enter in your zip code to find a shop near you and get it professionally installed. If you are wanting to do this yourself, though, definitely stick around and I'll help walk you through the process. So to begin our install, there is a little bit of pre-work that we're going to be doing here, just specifically because we are going to be doing this on camera and we need a little bit more room so you guys can actually see what we're doing. Now, typically, how you're going to be doing this is you want to actually have your wheels on and actually have your trailer resting on the suspension, because we want to make sure that we're not throwing off exactly where our angle is going to be, because we want to have our shock absorbers at about a 30-degree angle from the center of our axle. So to get that, if you lift up by the frame and let the suspension drop, you're going to have that kind of be off. So to kind of mitigate that issue, what I've done is I've thrown jack stands under each sides of my axle. I've got this back to where it was sitting once we were on the ground, so you can see my shackle straps are kind of back in the same position where they should be, sitting in that W shape here with our equalizer. Now, the next step's going to be actually swapping out our U-bolts here. Now typically, we have really short U-bolts and a smaller spring stack. This one actually has 7-inch long U-bolts already to start with, so we weren't able to reuse our tie plate for our spring stack here and our U-bolts, unfortunately. So one thing that you might want to check before you even purchase this kit, go out, see how many threads you really have still sitting on top of your tie plate, and then if you feel like there's not enough to throw on another 3/8 inch thick plate, then you definitely want to make sure that you purchase some new ones that are a little bit longer, so that way you can get each one of these tie plates on, because they typically do like to have both the Roadmaster tie plate plus our tie plate from our U-bolts installed on there. So with all that said, let's get started. I'm going to be using a 3/4 inch socket here, getting my U-bolt nuts loose. And since I am disconnecting the U-bolts, I do have to have the axle supported as well. So If you were doing this on the ground, you would still probably want to have something under there, some kind of jack stand or something, just to make sure that that does not move at all, because we don't want our axle to drop off. And then we're going to set these aside because we will be reusing our U-bolts. As you torque these U-bolts, they're going to kind of spread out just slightly. So that's why I was having that issue where it wasn't wanting to really match up. And one other thing I'm going to mention right now, you can kind of see how this wiggles right here, since we got a nice good close-up shot. Once we go to put that tie plate on, it's super important that we have this directly in the center. So you see how I have that little bit of gap? We don't want to have any gap at all, or if we do have a gap, we want it to be directly centered when we actually tighten this down. We don't want to lean in one way more to one side or the other here. I think with these though, they fit in pretty nicely. I don't feel like it really had much of a gap. Just a very tiny one still like we had with the previous one. But from there, now we can start sliding back up on our U-bolts. And like I said, since these kind of stretch out sometimes, I am going to have to use a clamp to kind of squeeze that back in, get it into my bracket. All right, we can get our nuts started on here. I'm not going to go too crazy with it because I do want to make sure each one of these is evenly tightened down. I don't want it kind of lopsided on here once we're actually tightening it. All right, we'll get these all hand tightened down to the same amount of thread sticking out. Just a couple. And then I'll switch over to my ratchet. So what I like to do when I'm tightening down U-bolts is kind of get them to about 10 foot-pounds and then move to the next one. And I try to crisscross it, so I'll do this one, switch over here, do this one, get that up to 10, go to the next one, and then diagonally across. Start the whole pattern back over again. And then just every like 10 foot-pounds I'll move until I get to my spec that I need to be at. And I like to double check it one more time. Just make sure tightening one bolt didn't loosen a different one. And then we're just going to repeat this over on our other axle. So now that we have our U-bolts torqued back down, it's time to add on our extension plates. And this is what the shock is going to attach to. So if we look at this, you can notice that there's 3 holes that are somewhat spaced closer together, and there'll be one kind of off on its own. That is going to be the bottom. That is for the shock actually to tie into. And that's going to be with our longer metric bolts. With our standard bolts, you're going to notice they're a lot shorter. These are 1/2 inch, and the lock nuts are different. So you can see there's a white nylock nut for this one, and it's a lot taller, so it's about 1/3 bigger. So don't get those mixed up because these will start to thread on and then they're gonna not really want to go on the rest of the way, but it's enough to trick you to where you might think, oh, okay, that's good, I just need to run it down with my wrench, and you don't want to do that because it's the wrong one, and then the other nut won't match with it. So I'm gonna get under here now and we can actually get these bolted up. We're gonna be using our 1/2 inch hardware. So I'm gonna throw my metric bolt back down. And we're going to be using the top 2 slots. If our leaf springs set below our axle, we would want to use the 2 middle ones. But since our leaf springs sit above our axle, we want to get the top 2. So let's get under there. We'll get these on real quick. And make sure you grab yourself a 3/4 inch socket and wrench. All right, we're going to slap our tie plate on to the outside edge of our extension plate on the outside edge of our tie plate. Pop our bolt through. Then on the inside, we got our nylock nut. Get that on. All right, I like to just slightly get that started and then put my other bolt through, make sure that I have this at the correct angle. It looks like we're catching some paint. There we go. And now that we got that on, I'm going to take my wrench, like I said, 3/4 inch. We'll snug these down. And then we can come back with our torque wrench and torque them down to spec as well. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side. All right, now we're going to take our metric bolts, slot on a flat washer. That's going to slip through the back of our extension plate From there, we're going to slide on one of our round spacers, another flat washer, our shock on the bottom there, another flat washer, and then our lock nut. I'm going to do this on the other side too, and this is so that we can kind of figure out what angle we need to be at. This kind of helps you out a little bit, having it there so you can lift it up and kind of also take your measurements, because we're going to be going from the center of our axle and then figuring out what that 30 degrees looks like, and then we can hold up our shock right to it, clamp on our bracket, which is right here, because this is going to sit inside just like so, and I want to get this perfect so that way I'm matching up to that center hole there.
All right, so we found our spot here. That's 30 degrees over using our axle. We're not going off of the extension plate. We want to go off of our axle. So now that I found where I want it, I've got it clamped up. I've got this flush with the edge of our frame rail. And what I'm going to do is take my paint marker, and since we have some paneling on our underbelly, we're going to have to trim out the section where our bracket's going to live, because this needs to be flush to our frame rail. So what I like to do is just take my paint pen, mark around it. I'll take my razor blade, and then I'm going to cut that out. On the last line here though, I'm going to cut it a little bit up just to where it's enough to where I can kind of lip that up over the frame, so that way when we come back and seal this up with some gasket maker, I don't have to hide as much of it with the gasket maker. Now with this section, like I said, I can tuck it up, and then when I go to seal, now I just have to seal here and then 2 lines across instead of filling in some opening here. Now we can take our paint marker again. I'm going to mark out the holes. So towards the outside of the frame rail, it's going to be a single hole. And then moving inside, it's a slotted hole, so it gives you a lot of opportunity to move it around in case you got something else in the way. Now when we pull that away, we have our marks. When I do this, I like to hit it a little bit back. Essentially what I'm trying to do is avoid the center of the frame rail, which is right here. So I want to have it kind of further out so I'm not drilling straight up into the center of the beam. And then this one is obviously going to be on that lip still, so all good there. I'll take my center punch, make it easier for me to not have my bit walk on me.
So now I'm going to be using a 12-inch 5/16 drill bit, and that is because we're now fighting against our leaf springs and our shackle straps here for space. So you got to almost kind of come at this at an angle. Now we don't want this to be some extreme angle, because I still want my flange bolts, which are these guys right here. I want those to sit nice and flush up against the bracket and the frame. I don't want them kind of going in too crooked. So try to get that as best you can, as straight as you can, but obviously it will be a little bit off. But I'm going to drill all 4 of these holes out, and this is probably the longest part of this process, just because it takes a little bit more to kind of drill through the frame. So for our bracket, now that I got those holes drilled out, we're going to be putting in these self-tapping screws. You can see they've got a little chunk of them cut out, and what this is going to do is it's going to cut threads into our frame rail, so they can get nice and tight. And to make sure it stays tight, we're going to be using some blue Loctite. I've already got my other bolts all ready to go, but just put a good healthy glob of it on there. And then we can pop these in. These are going to require a 9/16 socket in order to tighten them down. Make sure I got my bracket lined up right. I like to just get these kind of started. It's typically not something you can do by hand just because it is trying to cut through this. So I'll use my little ratchet, and then I'll finish it off with a impact just to get it up there. And once we have that in, then we can torque it down. I like to hit it with the impact just until it's touching. I'd rather finish it off with the torque wrench and go nice and slow so that way we don't end up breaking the bolt head. So it's pretty easy to shear these off if you're using an impact. All right, those are all good, so now we're gonna do the same thing over on our other side here. So now with our frame mounts in place, we are now gonna get our hardware ready for our shock up top. And what I'm doing is I'm taking those metric bolts again, and I'm throwing on a flat washer that's gonna pop through our bracket. I'm not gonna go too far because this is kind of tight quarters with the underbelly cover right here. Once we get past that, we're gonna have a spacer. So I'm gonna get that spacer on. And I'm only getting just enough of the threads to show to put the next piece on each time. From there, we're throwing another flat washer on. We'll get that onto our shock. And then another flat washer and our nylock nut. I'm gonna do this on the same process over on the other side. And then we're gonna snug these down and torque them. And once we have those tightened down, we can then remove our band here. Once again, we're using a 3/4 inch socket and wrench. All right, now we can take our band off. Sometimes you can cut it, sometimes you can just kind of slip it off. There's just tape holding it onto either end. We can toss that aside, and that's gonna do it for our install. Well, that's gonna do it for our look at and installation of the Roadmaster Comfort Ride shock absorbers for tandem axle trailers here on our 2025 Grand Design Influence fifth wheel trailer. My name's Kevin. If you still have some questions about what's going to be the right suspension enhancement for your fifth wheel trailer, please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out on your journey.